They hang Gilles de Rais, Marshal of France, at Nantes on October 26, 1440. The fire is already laid beneath him. Before the rope tightens, the court has named 140 children. The first one in the file is 12 years old. His father is Jean Joudon. The boy works for a furrier named Guillaume Gilles de Rais in Machecoul. Around 1432, two of Gilles' cousins, Gilles de Rais and Roger de Briqueville, borrow him to carry a message to the castle. He never comes back. Gilles de Rais asks. Joudon asks. They are told the boy was sent on an errand. 8 years later, Gilles de Rais, his wife, Joudon, his wife, and 5 other residents of Machecoul testify to the same absence. 11 years before the rope, Gilles de Rais had carried the holy oil to the altar at Reims and helped crown a king. 5 months before the rope, he walked into a church during Mass with armed men and a double-edged axe in his hand. The bishop who judged him had been buying his castles. The duke who ordered the arrest had men inside the same deeds. A boy gone from Machecoul, a confession in the court's preferred form, a letter from the king written 3 years too late. If Gilles de Rais was the monster in the confession, why did the men who judged him already have their hands on his land? April 25th, 1429, Blois. A 24-year-old lord of Brittany rides into the city at the head of an escort. His order is narrow. Bring a girl to Orléans. The girl is Joan of Arc. The lord is Gilles de Rais. Orléans has been under English siege for 6 months. The French crown needs a peasant girl, a convoy, and armed nobles moving through hostile country to keep her alive on the road. 2 weeks later, Gilles rides with the French vanguard at the relief of Orléans. On May 8th, the English lift the siege. The campaign moves up the Loire. Jargeau falls in mid-June. Beaugency falls a few days later. On June 18th, 1429, the English army is caught in open country near the village of Patay. The French cavalry hits the line before it can form. By the end of the day, the English have lost most of their commanders and the field. The Loire Valley opens, and with it the road north, and with it the road to Reims. Gilles rides through all of it. So does Joan. On July 17th, 1429, inside the cathedral at Reims, Gilles carries the Sainte Ampoule to the altar, the vial of holy oil used to anoint French kings since the 9th century. The monks at Reims taught that a dove had brought the vial from heaven for the baptism of Clovis. Every French king since had been anointed from it. Charles VII is crowned. The same day, the king makes Gilles Marshal of France. He is 24 years old. By nightfall on July 17th, 1429, 3 things rest in his name: a sacred vial, a king's crown, a military title that no Breton lord his age has carried before. The hands tied for hanging in 1440 had once carried the oil that touched the king. The blood is not in the record yet. 3 years after Reims, his grandfather dies. Jean de Cron had spent 40 years acquiring land. On November 15th, 1432, the inheritance falls to Gilles, undivided. Chantosse, Machecoul, Tiffauges. 3 castles before the map is half open. The inheritance carries rents, courts, roads, mills, and men with weapons. In 15th century Brittany, holding a castle meant holding a court day, a gate, and the right to call men under arms. When land changes hands, command changes hands. Gilles spends. He keeps a private chapel choir of 25 to 30 boys. Their vestments are stiffer than the Bishop of Nantes' own robes. He commissions Le Mystère du Siège d'Orléans, a verse drama restaging the campaign he had fought 4 years earlier. 20,000 lines, 500 extras, costumes never reused, 140 speaking parts. 140 bodies on stage. To pay for it, he sells. He sells to merchants in Nantes and Angers. He sells to Jean de Malestroit, Bishop of Nantes and Chancellor of Brittany. He sells to the household of Duke Jean V of Brittany. By 1437, large portions of Champtocé and Engrand have passed into the Duke's hands through forced sale. The buyers are not outside the story. They will judge him. A corrupt buyer does not invent a missing child. A missing child does not clean a judge. Both can be true at the same time. On July 2nd, 1435, Charles VII signs a royal interdict. Gilles, Marshal of France, is forbidden from selling more property or entering new contracts. The Duke of Brittany enforces it within his jurisdiction. The signature stops new deeds. It does not return the ones already filed. The more land Gilles sells, the harder it becomes to know whether the buyers are witnesses or hunters. He is 30 years old. He has 5 years left. In 1438, Gilles sends Eustache Blanchet across the Alps with one instruction: find an alchemist who can make gold. The money keeps leaving. The estates keep shrinking. The interdict has stopped new contracts on paper. It has not stopped the spending. In Florence, Blanchet finds Francesco Prelati, born around 1417 in Montecatini, a young Italian cleric who claims he can summon demons. In mid-May 1439, Prelati arrives at Tiffauges. He is about 22 years old. Gilles is 34. Between mid-1439 and early 1440, the trial record names 10 to 12 attempts to summon a demon. The demon's name is Baron. The first ceremony takes place in the lower hall at Tiffauges. The room is stone-walled and barred from inside. Gilles steps into a circle traced in soil on the floor. He holds a consecrated sword. He holds a parchment. On the parchment, he has written obedience to Baron in exchange for riches and power. He has also written 2 refusals. He will not surrender his soul. He will not die early. He wants hell to finance him. He wants terms. He says the words. Nothing answers. Prelati keeps trying. Gilles keeps paying. After repeated failures, Prelati tells Gilles the demon requires offerings, human organs. At a later invocation, Gilles brings a heart, a hand, and a pair of eyes. They are placed in a glass vessel, covered with linen, and offered again. No demon arrives. No gold appears. The organs were burned. The ritual still failed. Etienne Corriot, the valet known as Poitou, will testify about Tiffauges on October 17, 1440. He names the room, the vessel, the linen, the parchment. Henriet Griard, the second valet, testifies on the same day. Eustache Blanchet, the priest who had gone to Florence, testifies after them. The clerks who copy the testimony note that the 3 descriptions of the rituals overlap closely. Then the parents enter the file. September 1438, La Roche-Bernard. The Marshal's company lodges overnight at the inn of Jean Collin. Etienne Corriot speaks to a woman about her 10-year-old son returning from school. Her name is Perron Lossart. Corriot tells her the boy can be educated as a page. He offers money. She resists. He brings payment for a dress. She accepts. The next morning, she walks to where the Marshal is staying. Her son is there. She asks Gilles to treat the child kindly. Gilles says nothing. He turns to Corriot and says the boy has been well chosen. The child leaves on a pony. Jean Collin's record names the price, 60 sous. Perron Lossart will repeat this in front of the Duke's commissioners on September 18, 1440. By then, her son has been missing 2 years. She names a payment, a promise, a pony, and a lord who answered her by turning away. A threat would have admitted that something had happened. Gilles gave her no answer. She walked back to her inn with the payment made, the boy gone, and the door closed by rank. In the villages around Machecoul, the parents learn what speech costs. André Barbe of Machecoul tells investigators that those who complained risked imprisonment and ill treatment. Then a peasant woman appears in the record, Perrine Martin, gray dress, black hood, known in the villages as La Meffraye, the Terror. Witnesses say she lured children toward the castle on errands. She is arrested. She is taken to the prison at Nantes. There, before she dies, she confesses to leading children to the gate at Machecoul. She does not name the rooms inside. She does not have to. The valets do that. The more the parents are forced into silence, the harder each sworn deposition has to carry. By 1440, children are still going missing around Machecoul. The demon at Tiffauges still has not appeared. The bishop and the duke now hold deeds to large portions of Gilles's estates. The bishop has not moved yet. He needs a public breach. Gilles gives him one. May 15th, 1440, Saint-Étienne de Mer Morte. Mass is in progress. Gilles de Rais walks into the church with armed men and a double-edged axe in his hand. Standing at the altar is a cleric named Jean Le Ferron. Jean Le Ferron's brother is Geoffroy Le Ferron, treasurer to Duke Jean V of Brittany. Geoffroy holds rights over property formerly belonging to Gilles, including the priory at Saint-Étienne. Gilles seizes the cleric and drags him out of the church. No alchemy is needed for this charge. No rumor from Machecoul is needed. A church, a cleric, armed men, and witnesses inside the building. Gilles has violated ecclesiastical immunity. He has opened the door for the bishop himself. On July 29, 1440, Bishop Jean de Malestroit publishes letters patent. He has investigated Machecoul. His letter cites the disappeared children and the invocations at Tiffauges. The bishop now has legal ground. On September 15, 1440, 20 soldiers under Captain Jean Labé ride to Machecoul. Gilles surrenders his sword. He is taken to the Tour Neuve at Nantes, the ducal castle, residence of Jean V, and held there 4 weeks. A man who had ridden at Orléans now sits inside the duke's walls. On September 18th, while Gilles is held in the Tour Neuve, the duke's commissioners open a parallel secular inquest. Perron Mossart testifies first. Other parents and villagers follow through October 8th. The depositions are recorded in French. The bishop's ecclesiastical inquest, recorded in Latin, runs alongside. By the time the trial proper begins, 2 parallel files have been built. October 13th, 1440, Tour Neuve, Nantes. The prosecutor, Guillaume Chapillon, reads 49 articles of indictment. Bishop Malestroit and the vice-inquisitor, Jean Blouin, Dominican of Nantes, preside. The first charge is the murder of 140 children. The others follow: sodomy, heresy through the invocation of demons, the kidnapping of Jean Le Ferron. 140. The same number as the speaking parts in the play Gilles had commissioned to celebrate his own war. Gilles had paid for that play. Gilles refuses to plead. He is excommunicated. He accepts the court's authority under threat of further sanction. The 2 valets, Corriot and Henriet, give their depositions. They name the rooms, the times of night, the methods used to kill the boys. Interrogated separately, they return the same rooms, the same times, the same methods. The notary records both. Francesco Prelati testifies as well. He confirms the rituals and the offerings. He places himself in the lower hall at Tiffauges beside Gilles. On October 21st, 1440, the court orders torture for Gilles. The torture is recorded as ordered, but not carried out. Under the threat and under continuing excommunication, he confesses. He confesses to everything in the articles. He confesses in the form the court has prepared. The closer a man stands to a king's coronation, the further he can fall before anyone is allowed to catch him. The bishop has been buying his castles. The duke's household has been buying his castles. Geoffroy Le Ferron, the duke's treasurer, holds rights over Saint-Étienne. The defendant's land has already moved through hands close to judgment. Gilles does not look innocent. The men who pronounce judgment do not stand clean either. October 26th, 1440. Nantes. They bring out the Marshal of France. They hang him. They cut him down before the fire takes him. They give his body to 4 noblewomen for burial in the Church of the Carmelites. The rope, then the fire, then a body handed to nuns. The court is finished with the body. The land is not finished. The walls, the rents, the court days, the men-at-arms, the villages that change command when the Lord changes, all of it stays where the sails had moved it. The buyers do not return what they bought. Francesco Prelati is sentenced to life imprisonment by the church court. Within months, he is released by René of Anjou and enters that duke's service. He is hanged 12 years later in Paris for an unrelated offense. Eustache Blanchet is sentenced to penance and released. The 2 valets, Corillot and Henriet, are hanged and burned with Gilles on October 26th. On January 3rd, 1443, less than 3 years after the execution, Charles VII issues letters patent to the Duke of Brittany. The letter denounces the verdict. It calls Gilles indûment condamné, unduly condemned. The king said the verdict was wrong. The duke did nothing. The bishop did nothing. The land already transferred stayed where it had been sold. In 1904, the historian Salomon Reinach reads the trial transcripts. He publishes a monograph in Paris. He sees the questions the conviction had not closed. The 2 valets' depositions are nearly identical, in form and in detail. Reinach argues that this textual identity is not the signature of 2 men remembering the same crimes. It is the signature of 2 men reciting the same prepared text under threat. The judges had been purchasing the defendant's land. The defendant had confessed under threat of further excommunication. The bodies of the murdered children had never been recovered or identified. Reinach does not argue that Gilles was innocent of everything. He argues that the trial cannot be trusted as a complete record of the truth because the men running it were not standing outside the case. His monograph does not overturn the conviction. The mainstream view still treats Gilles de Rais as guilty of most of what the articles claim. The 1440 conviction stands. The judges did not lose count of the deeds. The Tour Neuve at Nantes is gone. Champtocé and Machecoul still appear in the property registries of Loire-Atlantique and Maine-et-Loire. Tiffauges is a ruin open to weather. The lower hall, where Prelati traced the circle, where the glass vessel sat in linen, still stands. On January 3rd, 1443, Charles VII signed a letter. The letter is in the archive. The land is not.